Welcome to the Irish Farmers Journal Weekly Podcast.
Hello and welcome to this week's podcast. I'm Hannah Quinn Mulligan. Coming up on the show today. Now, with all this talk of carbon neutrality, what role will farmers play in the future?
And the only way it can be sustainable is if you have at least 60 or 70% slurry. So I would see farmers providing slurry to biogas plants to ensure sustainability. Within the EU, if you have a transport fuel from slurry, you get a double credit. It's counted as twice because it's so beneficial.
And taking ploughing back to its roots. We talked to one Sligo man who took up horse ploughing just 3 years ago and competed last week at the National Ploughing Championships.
The lad on the lee lad and the guy standing on the fore is Ned and Ted.
And is there a better behaved one? Do Ned and Ted, who keeps who in line there?
I suppose Ned is the leader. He has to step on the fore, so he has to bring the other guy with him. But no, they're fairly good behaved now. They're easy to work with.
But first, with the next budget just a matter of weeks away, the IFA held their lobbying event to highlight farm issues to politicians today. Correspondent Thomas Hubert spoke to IFA Farm Business Chair Martin Stapleton about what the IFA would like to see in the next budget. And Fine Gael TD for Carlow, Pat Deering.
What's your message in this lobbying event to the TDs and senators you're meeting today?
Our message is very simply how important it is to support agriculture through what is a difficult time for us. It's been an enormously difficult year. Commodity prices across all sectors back, and every sector has been hugely negatively impacted by the ongoing poor, unsuitable weather that we've had.
We're days away from the budget. What's the feedback you're getting from politicians? How receptive are they to this message?
Well, they're here to listen. They're taking on board what we have to say. Some of them are highlighting the difficult budgetary constraints, but very much I think they're supportive and understand the need to continue to invest in Irish agriculture. We're impressing on them what an enormous role that agriculture and the jobs that come through processing of the primary product, the role that has in Irish agriculture, in the Irish economy. And I think, the politicians are supportive. And I think interested and see the need to do the best they can for farmers to continue farming as being a really, really strong employer and source of income for everybody living in rural Ireland.
Is there one or two measures you're pushing more, particularly at this point in time with them?
Yeah, I think on the expenditure side, the big one this year is the need to support the suckler cow. Huge ongoing decline in the numbers of suckler cows around the country. And again, that's hugely impacting parts of rural Ireland that are unsuited to any other farming enterprise. So that's one. And on the taxation side, I would say, there's technical ones there about maintaining reliefs that are due for renewal. But again, primarily, I would say the need to recognise volatility of farm incomes and to make sure that farmers are not penalised because of that volatility by losing their tax credits, having to pay extraordinary high taxes in 1 year and maybe having no taxes the following year. So hugely pushing that as well, that a number of measures need to be put in place there.
Okay, Martin, thanks very much. Let's now talk to one of the TDs here and see what they think. Thanks very much. Thank you. I'm now with Pat Deering, Chairman of the Agriculture Committee in the Oireachtas. And Pat, maybe would like to hear from you what you heard from farmers today and what you're taking it from them, where you're taking from them back to the Dáil and to the committee.
Yeah, I suppose we and I personally engage with farming groups both in Carlow and Kilkenny on a regular basis. I've met them in the past couple of weeks, as I do meet them regularly, and today is obviously the pre-budget day out. There's obviously a concern about income volatility. It's been a tough year in farms right across the country, in particular the southeast in my own area. From a further point of view, there's extra costs involved. There was going to be implications down the line as regards the availability of credit, and that's been discussed here today. Obviously, the other big issue is the possibility of extra funding for suckler farmers, and suckler farmers have been going through a difficult time for a number of years now. So there's obviously a renewed emphasis and renewed vigour and renewed enthusiasm within farm groups for that alone.
Any chance of this coming to reality?
Well, obviously, I'm not the Minister for Agriculture or the Minister for Finance, and we'll know next time. I've certainly been talking to the Minister for Agriculture and the Minister for Finance about, in a very detailed way over the past number of weeks now, continue those discussions this week as well.
The Taoiseach came to the ploughing and we asked him for his priorities. He said it was very much going to be housing and health. Are you going to make sure farming doesn't get forgotten in this budget?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as I've said time and time again, Without agriculture and farming, this economy wouldn't be as strong as it is today. During the difficult years of the recession, agriculture was one that really went from strength to strength. We're seeing exports increase exponentially on a year-on-year basis, and we see last year new records of almost 14 billion, and I expect that will be increased again in the next number of years. So agriculture is our biggest indigenous industry and needs to be supported, and I will be doing my best to ensure that happens.
Thomas Hubert finishing that report speaking to Pat Deering, who some of you will be familiar with for informally announcing the location of next year's ploughing at the National Ploughing Championships. He then incurred the wrath of organisers Anna Marie and Anna May McHugh. However, with his usual tact, Thomas Hubert avoided asking anything on the issue. Now, as mentioned in the intro, there's a certain buzz around biogas, with the Gas Networks Ireland recently saying they'll need farmers to grow 10 million tonnes of grass to help fuel anaerobic digesters by 2030. Now, putting aside a potential clash with fodder demands for a minute, what a role could the biogas have for Irish farmers? Our correspondent Thomas Hubert was at the European Biomethane Conference and asked UCC academic Jerry Murphy how he saw the sector developing in Ireland and the role that farmers had to play.
The largest source of feedstock for biogas comes from agriculture. So without farmers, there really isn't going to be a biogas industry. When we look at EU directives for sustainable energy, we're heading towards a carbon neutrality in 2050. That's where we're heading to. And at the moment, Ireland has reduced its greenhouse gas emissions by 1% as compared to 2005, and we have to get to 80%. So we have to do things 80 times better than we're doing now. And if you look at agriculture, I mean, if you have an open slurry tank, typically 17% of the methane potential for that is going up into the atmosphere. And methane has a very high global warming potential, 25 times that of CO2. So covering those tanks and making biogas gives you greenhouse gas negative situation, that you're far, far better off covering the tank, making biogas. You're carbon negative. You could actually have a situation where if you have a bus running on biogas from a farm, the more kilometres it travels, the better off the world is, because you're displacing all those fugitive emissions. And if Ireland is looking at a biogas industry basing on some crops and slurry, the slurry is going to be really, really important, because if you use grass to make biogas, you have a carbon footprint because you grow the grass and you fertiliser and you drove a tractor up and down the fields. And the only way it can be sustainable is if you have at least 60 or 70% slurry. So I would see farmers providing slurry to biogas plants to ensure sustainability. Within the EU, if you have a transport fuel from slurry, you get a double credit. It's counted as twice because it's so beneficial. Our perspective is going into the future when we get far, far better. So 2030, 2035 is that farmers will have biogas facilities, but they'll also have biorefinery systems. It may be that there's a biogas plant and they use microalgae to take the CO2 out, so you now have microalgae. And that can be bottled and sold as a health product. It can be used for many other things. So the farming community of the future, I think, should embrace biogas plant. They can also end up selling CO2. CO2 is quite a valuable product. If you liquefy CO2, send it to greenhouse gas, you bubbly water. Slaughterhouses need CO2. So you may be selling CO2, you may be selling methane. You'll also have an organic fertilizer, so you're reducing mineral fertilizer. So there's many, many benefits from a biogas plant. And to me, this whole industry can change agriculture. It's like a menu of options. I can sell CO2. I have biofertilizer. I have a feedstock that's essential for biogas plants. Maybe I grow microalgae. There's also potential, and this is happening now in Europe, that you may end up facilitating intermittent renewable electricity. So it may be that surplus electricity is converted to hydrogen on the farm. So when the wind is blowing and we don't need it, make hydrogen. If you add hydrogen to a biogas plant, you get pure methane. So there's many options available for farmers.
You're talking about a very different farm to the one we see today. Are people ready for this when you talk to them, when you go to farms? Or is it maybe something too different and too much for them to take in? How do you get received when you make those statements to farmers?
I think you will have entrepreneurial farmers. They exist. They're out there at the moment who will make these leaps. I work with a young farmer who's doing a PhD with me in Cork, but he has a biogas plant in the south of Germany. He manages it from an iPhone. But that biogas plant only operates for 2 or 3 hours a day. And what he did is that he built a district heating system for his little town, and he leased out access to the trenches to data cables. But what he does is when electricity is expensive, he starts producing biogas at that time. So the biogas plant might operate for 2 hours a day in terms of the CHP. He pipes hot water into all the houses, and they have a 1 metre cube tank. And then he's offline for the rest of the day. So he's had 2 hours of operation. He's sold the biogas electricity when the demand was highest. So 7 o'clock in the morning, we're all turning on showers. So biogas is dispatchable. But he's a young farmer who has built a district heating system, who still operates his farm, who still does the harvest, who still has cattle, but he's also selling heat to the whole town. He's selling electricity to the grid when it's most required. He has biofertilizer, and he's selling access to a data cable to his trench. And I see loads of Irish farmers with these abilities. I mean, you see farmers who'll put up a wind turbine, they'll have PV, and I see the farmer of the future embracing biotechnology. And we have a new degree starting in UCC, which is run by Teagasc and the university. And it's a BSc in agriculture, but we hope to train farmers into, you can be making microalgae, you can be selling carbon dioxide, you could be selling methane. There's potential to catch electricity when it's surplus and make hydrogen. I mean, I see a huge potential for farmers. They own the land, they have large quantities of land. We need bioenergy. The IEA believe that we have to have bioenergy with carbon capture. So I can see farmers with biogas plants producing electricity and then capturing the CO2 and getting benefits for capturing the CO2. So I think it's a huge vista. There's a huge menu available for young entrepreneurial farmers.
Okay, thank you, Jerry, and a very different, bright future you're describing there. Thanks very much.
Okay.
Thomas Hubert finishing that report. Now, if like me, you treat your phone like an extension of your hand, then you might be interested to know that the Irish Farmers Journal has launched a new app called Mart Bids, a way to gain an inside track into mart prices around the country. However, before you go downloading the app, grab a pen and paper and keep your ears glued to the wireless, as our beef editor Adam Woods rattles off an old-fashioned mart report with GVM mart manager Michael Harty.
Michael, I suppose today you had a special sale of bullocks here today. General trade is supposed to start off with those bullocks. General trade is what?
General trade has improved, a lot more farmer activity, and prices will be up considerably in the last week to 2 weeks. I suppose the improvement in grass growth and the weather in general has led to some better prices being achieved.
So you're seeing another bit of confidence around the ring there today in terms of purchasers?
Definitely much more farmer activity, and particularly for those cattle from 450 kilos up. I see 4 Hereford bullocks 447 making 925, and a further 498 making 980. Those nice lighter quality store bullocks are also a good trade, with 385 kilos making 850, 380 kilo making 890. But for the lighter cattle, it's more quality orientated.
It's definitely more standing outside in the ring there. It's definitely quality is really coming to the fore out there today. Your lighter, poor quality cattle, there generally isn't as many customers for them type of cattle.
No, the lighter cattle, anything under 350 kilos is a tough sell, and the Frisian bullocks. But the heavier Frisian bullocks have improved in trade, and prices will be up 50 to €100 in the past 2 to 3 weeks.
To move on to heifers, I know you have a special heifer sale coming up next week, but out there today in terms of heifer trade, what have you seen?
Well, the good quality again, a Charlotte heifer 450 making 1,000, another one 485 making 1,100, and 2 limousines 435 made 875. But even the Hereford and the Angus have improved. Hereford heifers and Angus heifers down that 380 to 390 kilo, getting into €700. And that will be a much improved price than was being achieved.
Your special heifer sale is next Tuesday. How many heifers are you expecting in the yard next?
We expect that we will have in the region of 100 to 150 lots of heifers, and we have some good quality heifers booked in for the sale. So that's next Tuesday, the 2nd of October.
That's Michael Harty speaking to the Irish Farmers Journal here in Nina Mart, County Tipperary. Thanks very much, Michael.
Adam Woods and Michael Harty there. Now, something we're all afraid will have a profound effect on mart and indeed all beef prices is Brexit. And with just a few more months to go, a bit of clarity regarding a future deal with the UK still looks as far away as ever. Beef editor Adam Woods spoke to Board Bia's beef sector manager Joe Burke to gain an overall picture of Irish exports and to gauge if the Brexit beef issue had improved.
Yeah, in overall terms, we've exported over 200,000 cattle for the year to date, and that's an increase of about 30%. But overall, when we look at those numbers, almost 3/4 of them, almost 150,000, have been calves. So the big increase really has been in the springtime of the year, the early summer months, when there were a lot of calves exported to the Dutch market, so Frisian bull calves for veal production, and to the Spanish market, where in general a lot of Frisian bull calves as well too, but also a lot of Angus bull calves, where they're pushed on and finished as young bulls at 14 or 15 months.
We've seen a reduction in Northern Ireland down to the tune of 40%. What's the reason for that? Is it currency? Is it red tractor label? What's the issues up there?
Yeah, so over the last good few years we've seen a slowdown and a demise really in terms of live exports to the north, so less competition there now over the last few years in terms of good store cattle going up there up to that market. Really it represents a reluctance on the meat factories above in Northern Ireland to handle those animals. In general, where they're handled, they're paid a discount and offered lower prices than domestic Northern Irish cattle. And the reason for that is really because the supermarkets in the UK have a preference for beef that is either Irish beef, in terms of being born, raised and slaughtered in Ireland, or British beef, so born, raised and slaughtered in the UK. And any of these cattle that go north, they have to be labelled differently in terms of born in Ireland, raised in the UK, slaughtered in the UK, and that beef then, because of the customer requirements, doesn't manage to make it onto the supermarket shelves.
I suppose to move on to markets, we've seen some pressure applied over the last 3 weeks as regards beef price. It's coming down. Reasons for that? Is it supply? Is it demand? What's the issues there?
Yeah, so the weekly kill over the last few weeks has increased strongly. Last week was up around 38,500, and all indications suggest that it'll probably hit the 40,000 mark over the coming weeks. That would be some of the reason for the downward pressure, but in fact we haven't that much extra beef to sell even in comparison to last year, because on average carcass weights are somewhat lighter this year than they were last year. Actually, where a lot of the pressure is coming on is at market level, where there has been more beef on the European market than last year, and this is the result of extra culling, earlier slaughter of young cattle as well too around Europe as a result of feed scarcity and drought, particularly around Northern Europe, Adam.
I suppose as regards maybe Brexit, we talked about the UK market a lot in the demos, and we talked about, I suppose, your plan. What is the plan in terms of worst case scenario? Shutters come down on the 1st of April, 280,000 tonne, need to find a market. What happens?
Yeah, so even though Board Bia has been putting a lot of effort into diversifying into new markets, increasing our exports outside of the UK, when we look at our exports based on the CSO figures for the year to date, actually our exports into the UK have increased by 2%, and that's just a natural reaction by the sector to the higher prices that are available in the UK. In general, they are higher than what's prevailing over in continental Europe. Now, we are still putting in a lot of resources into promoting Irish beef in other markets, Germany, the Netherlands for example, Italy, all good markets. But if all of a sudden we were closed out of the UK and we had to find homes for 280,000 tonnes of Irish beef, it'd be a big problem, not just for Ireland but for Europe. It would have a big negative effect in dragging down beef prices, right across the continent really.
So that's good for us in terms of political negotiation, in terms of trying to, say, allay those fears.
It definitely is, and it's well recognised, for example, by the French farm lobby groups that visited Ireland as well too over the last 2 years since this issue really came to the fore, and they really do understand that if all of a sudden we started sending a lot more of our beef there, it'd be a serious negative effect on prices. Also, we now have market access, as you know, Adam, to the Chinese market. That will take away some of the volume. It's not going to compensate for the UK, but we have 6 meat factories now that are eligible and approved to send frozen beef from under 30 months animals over to the Chinese market. That's a big opportunity. I'd see it growing strongly over the next few years. I know, it's starting from nothing. It's starting from a standing start as of the middle of this year when we first got access. But you'd have to think that a population of 1.5 billion people, very much growing middle class urban consumers, and it's fashionable as well too over there to eat beef as a high quality protein. They have a very low awareness of Ireland so far, but we're doing our best to try and improve that, and especially working with high potential customers, be they food service customers or restaurant chains or online retailers. So far, Irish beef has gotten off to a good start over there.
I see Origin Green on your jacket. How important is that story in terms of penetrating those new markets?
It's very, very powerful. And, you know, a lot of farmers maybe that we've been speaking to this week asking about Origin Green, really see it maybe as, a Board BIA initiative, see it as maybe a meat industry thing as well too that they can use to their advantage. But really the message that we're trying to put out there is, it's Ireland Inc. This is Ireland. This is for Irish farmers, that they have ownership over this, because every farmer who's a member of the Quality Assurance Scheme, and we have over 50,000 of them in the scheme for beef, at the time of the farm audit, they're undergoing a sustainability survey, so we know the carbon footprint of the beef that they're producing on every one of those farms. We have a very positive message to tell, not just in terms of our quality assurance and our green credentials and the fact that we have a lower carbon footprint than most of the other European and global beef producing countries, but this represents a commitment by all Irish food producers and beef producers in particular, that we are going to continue to produce in a sustainable way to meet the growing global demands and European demands as well too in our established markets for high quality sustainably produced food.
Joe Burke and Adam Woods there. Stay tuned, because still to come we have a piece on managing future dairy tax bills and what was certainly my favourite interview from the ploughing last week.
Department-backed suckler payments. In this week's Irish Farmers Journal, high-level department group says there is a need for support for sucklers. Cattle farmers set to protest at Beef Forum next week. Regional vet lab strikes, a very real possibility. Over 700 farmers affected by Department of Agriculture data breach. And in this week's Irish Country Living, we take a look at pancreatic cancer and find out why this serious disease is so difficult to diagnose and what symptoms to look out for. Inside this week's Irish Farmers Journal, on sale today.
Now, with bills mounting after a tough 2018 and the tax bill due shortly for 2017, a number of dairy farmers in particular are feeling hard hit. This week, Teagasc launched a report looking at ways that dairy price volatility could be managed, including introducing new income averaging tools. I spoke to lecturer at CIT Declan O'Connell and Dr Jason Lockery of Teagasc about the report.
Declan O'Connell, lecturer, Cork Institute of Technology. In the US at present, farmers can avail of margin insurance, and from next month they will be able to avail of revenue insurance. So the margin insurance allows the farmers in the US to guarantee their margin, which is the difference between their revenue and input costs, in particular feed costs. So the uptake of these products in the US have been slower than anticipated for a number of reasons. First of all, the cost. Even though they are highly subsidised, farmers still consider that there isn't a cost benefit to using these products. And secondly, they have felt that the insurance products don't cover their own farm specific needs. So these insurance products are based on indices, and in the industry they talk about a basis risk, which is the difference between what the individual farmer experiences and what the indices are telling us about prices, whether they are milk price or the feed input costs.
And I think you gave a very rough example. You were saying it was there, and I think I saw that to insure a price of 36 cents a litre, it was something that's going to cost the farmer over 4 cents per litre. So I mean, could you see it being taken up here? Would it appeal to Irish farmers?
I would imagine that any insurance product launched in the Irish market would require very heavy subsidisation, as is the case in the US. So I don't think there would be an appetite for farmers to spend maybe 5 cents to guarantee a price of 36 cents. So it would require very, very heavy subsidisation.
Jason Lockery, Research Officer at Teagasc. The 555 tool is proposed by Dairy Research Ireland. It's potentially a risk management tool that would allow farmers to deposit money in an interest-bearing account for a 5-year period. And the 55 tool itself would be available to farmers who are already part of the income averaging system. And as it is currently designed, it would allow farmers to allocate 5% of their milk receipts in deposit in any given year. So that 5% would be a maximum amount that could be deposited, and any amount that would be deposited or deferred in any given year would have to be drawn down within the 5-year period. So there's a maximum amount that can be deposited, and there's a maximum say duration for which the money can be left in the account.
And is this in operation anywhere else? Is it in operation in Australia or something like that? And how's it been working out?
Okay, so I think in both Canada and Australia they have a similar risk management tools available, and I understand certainly in the Australian situation it's been very popular in terms of the number of farmers involved in it. Now, our analysis, yes, it is focused primarily on and solely really on the dairy sector in Ireland, but you might certainly conclude from our analysis that it's highly relevant to the other farming sectors as well, where the income volatility is very high, and if farm households are finding that their income tax liabilities and so on are fluctuating from year to year because of their income volatility, then it's a potentially useful tool should it ever come into practice.
So, and we know farmers this year have had a very tough year with all the weather that's involved, and dairy farmers last year in particular facing a fairly high tax bill, so it probably would be welcomed. But is there a caveat to all of this? I mean, would farmers have to get some form of education? How would that be enrolled? Would it be through Teagasc or through co-ops, do you think?
Okay, so one of the things that emerges from the report is that the 555 tool, as it's currently designed, really it relies on the farmer decision making and the advice that a farmer may get in terms of how to operate the tool. So it's a complex enough tool to begin with, and farmers, if they were to operate it in practice, would definitely require sound financial advice. In order to get the best from the tool, because potentially it could lead to actually higher income volatility if it weren't used appropriately. So the importance of financial advice has to be emphasised, and I think co-ops would play a role in that certainly. In Teagasc, certainly we have financial expertise to some extent, but I think many of the other stakeholders would have to contribute heavily to ensuring that farmers actually make good decisions with such a tool.
Like a lot of people who have been going to the National Ploughing Championships over the years, I'm guilty of rarely actually seeing any ploughing being done. So it was a real treat last week to meet Coleman Colgan and his team of horses at the ploughing last Thursday.
What's your name and whereabouts are you from?
Coleman Colgan from County Sligo.
And there's two beautiful horses behind us. Do they have names, and what's their breed?
They do. They're Shire Drafts. And that outside lad there is Ted, the lad on the lee land, and the guy standing on the fore is Ned and Ted.
And is there a better behaved one? Do Ned and Ted, who keeps who in line there?
I suppose Ned is the leader. He has to step in the furrow, so he has to bring the other guy with him. But no, they're fairly good behaved now. They're easy to work with.
And how long have you been ploughing?
Horse ploughing, this is my third year.
Only your third year?
In All Ireland. I would have ploughed maybe a small bit when I was 12. My father worked horses into the early 70s, and when he gave up the horses, went can't. But I always had a bit of a craze. If I could afford them, I might still be able to afford them, but I have them anyway, and I have plenty of time.
And what is it that draws you to it? What was it?
To work with an animal and get them to pull a big load. There is a good pull on them when the plough is down 6 inches in the ground, and they're lovely to work with. They're like a pet dog. They know you, and they know you're
a 17-hand pet dog, you're telling me.
He's 18-1 and the other guy is 17-2. So,
and was it a lot of work getting them here?
It was a good bit now at the start, to be honest. I brought them out to the seaside, and that's where I trained them in the sand, so I could let go of the plough and just lead the horses. But once I got them that they knew what they had to do, it was easy enough. But every day they're getting better. So.
And how are you getting on today? How's it going for you?
Now I have 3 scrapes done, and the 4 scrapes, and they're the hardest 4 to do. From now on, I widen me scrape a little bit, and it'll lie over a bit better.
And is there time pressure? Do you have to have
There
done
is
at a certain
time pressure. You have 4 hours to do your plot, and there is a bit of time pressure because you'll have to do a bit of. It's slow work to keep it right. You'd like to get good marks. It's like doing the leaving.
Well, I better leave you to it, so thank you very much indeed. Best of luck.
Okay, thank you.
Coleman Colgan there with Ned and Ted, who I afterwards saw pictured in the Irish Times helping on Taoiseach Leo Varadkar plough his first furrow. Now, we have a special favour to ask this week. As part of our ongoing improvement of the podcast, we're doing a survey and would appreciate your feedback. There are just 10 questions, it'll take 2 minutes, and you can find the survey under ifj.ie/survey. That's ifj.ie/survey. We've already over 500 responses, but we're keen to get as many as possible before the survey closes. That's it for this week. Remember, you can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and the podcast is now available on Spotify. Fierce schmancy, I hear you say. The sound engineer this week was Ferdy Amooney, and I'm Hannah Quinn Mulligan.
The Irish Farmers Journal podcast, online at farmersjournal.ie and on iTunes every Thursday.